All right, so get this. We're diving deep today into the lives of Black American expats living in the Philippines.
Yeah, pretty interesting, right?
Ugh.
We've got this YouTube video full of interviews from people who actually up and moved there.
Wow.
And their stories are really something. It's not just like your typical travel vlogs, you know?
Yeah.
We're getting this like raw and unfiltered look at what it's really like to actually live there as a Black American in a predominantly Asian country.
Right?
And they talk about everything from like cultural perceptions to the dating scene,
Yeah.
even how their experiences there compare to life back in the U.S.
I was really struck by how many of them talked about feeling safe and welcomed in the Philippines.
Mm-hmm.
They mentioned a strong security presence,
Mm-hmm.
which seems to create a totally different atmosphere compared to what they might experience back home.
Yeah, that's a really important point. You
Yeah.
know, it speaks to that cultural emphasis on safety and order that they have over there.
Right.
And for Black Americans who may have experienced racism and felt a sense of vulnerability in the U.S.,
Yeah,
this can be a stark contrast for
for
sure.
sure.
Big time.
And it goes beyond just personal safety, too.
Oh, yeah.
Several of those interviewed even mentioned the slower pace of life time,
Uh-huh.
like they called island time,
I love that.
and how much they appreciated that shift from the hustle and bustle of American culture.
Yeah,
Did that resonate with you at all?
absolutely.
Yeah.
That desire for a more relaxed, laid-back lifestyle,
Mm-hmm.
it's a recurring theme in a lot of ex-paint narratives.
Right.
And it's interesting how this intersects with perceptions of Filipino culture as being like warm and family-oriented,
Yeah,
and that creates this sense of a welcoming and supportive environment,
absolutely.
which is so important,
So
Ryan,
important. Yeah.
when you're moving to a whole new country.
Yeah. Speaking of cultural differences, the video really dives into the dating scene.
Oh, yeah.
And I have to admit, I was a bit surprised by some of their observations.
Like what?
They talked about Filipino women being more straightforward in their communication
Interesting.
compared to American women,
Uh-huh.
even saying there was less gameplay.
No, that's where it gets interesting.
Right.
This could be linked to traditional Filipino values around courtship and family,
Okay,
where directness and clarity are very much valued.
makes sense.
It's a fascinating contrast to the often more ambiguous dating culture in the U.S.,
Well,
wouldn't you say?
For sure.
Yeah,
But they also acknowledge that financial stability is still a factor in dating,
right.
even if it's perhaps not as pronounced as in the U.S.
Sure, that highlights how cultural norms around gender roles and economic expectations
Ugh.
can influence dating dynamics no matter where you go.
It's so true.
It really makes you think about how much our own cultural backgrounds
Yeah.
shape our expectations and experiences in relationships.
Now we can't talk about the Black American experience abroad without addressing the elephant in the room,
Oh,
racism.
right, of course.
The video creator actually claimed that racism wasn't a major problem in the Philippines.
Interesting.
What were your thoughts on that?
Well, it's a bold statement.
Yeah.
And while some of the interviewees seem to agree, sharing anecdotes where their race didn't seem to be a factor,
Right.
others had different experiences.
Oh, really?
One guy mentioned getting stares, and another even suggested that Filipinos might show preferential treatment to white people.
So it's not as simple as saying racism doesn't exist in the Philippines.
Exactly. It's important to remember that perceptions of race are incredibly subjective
Yeah.
and influenced by individual sensitivities and cultural contexts.
Okay.
It's crucial to avoid generalizations
Right.
and acknowledge the complexity of racial dynamics in any society.
That makes a lot of sense. Could you elaborate on how cultural differences might impact perceptions of race,
Sure.
particularly in the Philippines?
Of course, the Philippines has this complex history shaped by colonization, migration,
Mm-hmm.
and a unique blend of Asian and Western influences.
Right.
This has created a social hierarchy where skin tone and perceived Westernness can sometimes play a role in social standing.
I see what you mean.
Yeah,
So it's not as clear-cut as black and white, so to speak.
precisely. While blatant racism might be less prevalent than in other parts of the world,
Okay.
there can be subtle biases and colorism woven into the cultural fabric.
Interesting.
It's important to be aware of these nuances and understand that personal experiences can vary widely.
One interview that really stood out was with a gentleman who first visited the Philippines back in 1979.
Wow.
He had a fascinating perspective on how much the country has modernized since then.
Yeah, that historical lens is invaluable.
Yeah.
It allows us to trace how globalization and technological advancements have shaped the Philippines,
Uh-huh.
particularly when it comes to economic opportunities.
He specifically mentioned the rise of IT jobs in the Philippines today.
Right,
It seems like a natural fit considering the global demand for tech talent
for sure.
and the Philippines' growing reputation as a hub for outsourcing.
Absolutely, and this ties into the whole digital nomad phenomenon, where
Oh,
people can work remotely from anywhere in the world.
yeah,
The Philippines, with its relatively affordable cost of living
right.
and relaxed visa policies, has become a hotspot for digital nomads seeking a change of pace.
He even touched upon the potential impact of AI on the IT sector,
Oh, wow.
which is a concern everyone's grappling with these days.
It's a critical question, you know. How will AI affect the IT job market in the Philippines specifically?
Right.
Will it create new opportunities or lead to displacement?
Yeah.
These are the kinds of questions we need to be asking as technology continues to evolve at such a rapid pace.
It really highlights how interconnected our world is
It really is.
and how seemingly distant technological advancements can have this ripple effect across the globe, impacting local communities in profound ways.
What's fascinating here is that through these personal stories, we're not just talking about these abstract economic trends, but rather how real people are navigating these changes seeking opportunities
Uh-huh.
and building lives for themselves.
And speaking of seeking opportunities, one interviewee had a really inspiring message about the importance of stepping outside your comfort zone
Yeah,
and experiencing new cultures.
love it.
He talked about how travel reinvigorated him and helped him connect with people from all walks of life.
That's a powerful takeaway.
Yeah,
It really speaks to the transformative potential of travel,
for sure.
not just for personal growth, but for fostering cross-cultural understanding and empathy.
Absolutely.
By immersing ourselves in different environments, we can challenge our assumptions, gain new perspectives, and maybe even discover hidden parts of ourselves
I love
we
that.
never knew existed.
That's great.
Yeah,
I love it.
me too.
You know, I was particularly intrigued by one interviewee's description of the camaraderie he found with other black men in the Philippines.
Yeah.
It seemed like being in that environment allowed for a different kind of connection.
It speaks to the idea of finding community in unexpected places, doesn't it?
Right.
Away from the societal pressures and historical baggage of their home country,
Uh-huh.
they were able to connect on a deeper level.
He actually used the phrase reset to describe it.
Interesting.
Like it was a chance to reevaluate values and relationships.
Hmm.
It's really got me thinking about how our surroundings can shape our interactions in ways we might not even realize.
It's like a fresh start, you know,
Yeah.
a chance to redefine yourself and your connections
Right.
outside the context of the familiar.
Yeah.
It's a reminder that community can be found anywhere as long as there's a shared understanding
Mm-hmm.
and a sense of belonging.
Now, we talked about the perceptions of racism in the Philippines
Right.
and how it seemed to differ from the U.S. experience.
Uh-huh.
But even though the interviewees generally felt welcome and safe,
Right.
there were still some complexities around race that came up.
Right. And I think it's important to acknowledge those nuances.
Yeah.
It's not about saying one place is perfect while another is inherently flawed.
Right.
Every society has its own unique set of challenges and complexities
Yeah.
when it comes to race and cultural understanding.
One interviewee even said that while he hadn't personally encountered much racism,
Okay.
it would be naive to say it doesn't exist at all.
Sure.
How do you reconcile those seemingly conflicting perspectives?
I think it goes back to the importance of individual experiences and avoiding generalizations.
Okay.
Just because someone hasn't encountered something firsthand
Right.
doesn't mean it's not a reality for others.
That's a good point.
Yeah.
It reminds us that we need to be open to hearing different perspectives and acknowledging that everyone's reality is shaped by their own unique experiences.
Absolutely. And that's how we move beyond simplistic comparisons
Mm-hmm.
and really start to understand the complexities of race and cultural dynamics in different contexts.
Right.
It's not about painting a rosy picture or pretending that challenges don't exist,
Yeah.
but rather approaching these conversations with a willingness to listen
Mhm.
and acknowledge the full spectrum of experiences.
The video also touched on the economic realities of living in the Philippines,
Yeah,
and it seems like affordability was a major draw for many of the expats.
sure.
They talked about the lower cost of living, especially compared to the U.S.
That's a big factor for a lot of people considering a move abroad,
Yeah.
especially for those coming from countries with a higher cost of living.
Right.
The ability to stretch their budget further and potentially improve their quality of life is a huge incentive.
One guy even joked that you could feel rich in the Philippines with just a little bit of money
Wow.
compared to the ever-increasing expenses back home.
That speaks to the relative purchasing power of the US dollar in the Philippines.
Right.
It allows expats to make their money go further,
Uh,
potentially affording them a lifestyle they wouldn't be able to have in their home country.
it's important to remember, though, that economic conditions can vary greatly within the Philippines.
Oh, for sure.
Just because some expats are able to live comfortably
Right.
doesn't mean everyone is experiencing that same level of economic stability.
You're absolutely right. It's crucial to be mindful of the economic disparities that exist within the country.
Yeah.
We can't lose sight of the fact that many Filipinos face poverty and economic challenges.
Right.
It's about being aware of the full picture and not just focusing on the positive aspects that benefit expats.
One of the interviewees brought up the traffic situation in the Philippines,
Okay.
particularly in Manila.
Yeah,
Apparently, it can be quite intense.
I bet.
He specifically mentioned the challenge of adjusting to motorcycles, having the right of way.
Traffic congestion is a common issue in many major cities around the world.
Sure.
And Manila, with its dense population and limited infrastructure, is certainly no exception.
It highlights the importance of being adaptable when living abroad, even when it comes to something as seemingly mundane as driving.
Exactly. What might be considered safe or courteous driving in one country can be very different in another.
Yeah.
It's all about respecting local traffic laws and customs and being prepared for a different experience on the road.
He also talked about the importance of patience and flexibility,
Oh, yeah.
embracing the island time mentality when navigating daily life in the Philippines.
I love that.
It seems like that laid-back approach can take some adjusting to.
That concept of island time really encapsulates a more relaxed, less time-bound approach to life,
Yeah,
which can be a major adjustment for those used to a faster pace.
for sure.
It's a reminder that cultural differences go beyond just language and cuisine,
Right.
extending even to our perceptions of time and productivity.
He had this great piece of advice: just let it be.
Mm.
Simple, but I think it speaks volumes about the need to embrace the unexpected and go with the flow when living in a new environment.
There's a certain wisdom in that. When you're living abroad, things won't always go according to plan.
Right.
And that's okay. It's about learning to navigate those challenges with grace, humor,
Uh-huh.
and a sense of adventure.
This idea of stepping outside your comfort zone and embracing the unknown seemed to be a recurring theme throughout these interviews.
Yeah, for sure.
It wasn't just about the initial decision to move abroad,
Right.
but also about the daily experiences of navigating a new culture.
It's about pushing yourself beyond the familiar, challenging your preconceived notions,
Mm-hmm.
and being open to new ways of seeing the world.
Right.
And in doing so, you often discover hidden strengths and resilience you didn't even know you had.
One interviewee described it as a chance to reinvigorate his life and connect with people from all walks of life.
Nice.
It really resonates with the idea that sometimes the most rewarding experiences come from venturing outside our comfort zones.
Absolutely. There's a certain magic in embracing the unfamiliar.
Yeah,
It opens you up to new possibilities, challenges your perspective,
right,
and ultimately helps you grow as a person.
right.
And that, I think, is one of the most compelling reasons to explore different cultures and engage with the wider world.
So we've been unpacking all these interviews with Black expats in the Philippines.
Yeah.
And what stands out to you the most about their experiences?
I think what's really striking is how their stories challenge so many assumptions that we might have about expat life,
Right.
about race relations, even about what it means to pursue happiness, you know?
One thing that keeps coming back to me is that idea of like resetting their lives.
Oh, yeah.
Several of them talked about moving to the Philippines as a way to reevaluate their priorities,
Right.
almost like hitting that refresh button.
It's a powerful concept, for sure.
Yeah.
It speaks to that very human desire for reinvention, to step outside of the familiar and create a new path for yourself.
Yeah.
I wonder if sometimes we need that physical and cultural distance to gain a truly fresh perspective.
And for some of these expats, that fresh perspective seemed to be tied to the connections they formed with other Black men. They
Yeah.
described a sense of brotherhood, a level of understanding they maybe hadn't experienced as strongly back home.
It's fascinating how cultural contexts can really shape our sense of belonging.
Yeah.
Sometimes being outside the dominant culture of your home country can actually create space for deeper, more authentic connections.
Now, the picture these interviews paint of the Philippines is quite idyllic.
Mm-hmm.
They focused on the warmth of the people, the affordability, the slower pace of life.
Right.
But we have to acknowledge this is just one slice of the Filipino experience.
Absolutely. It's so important to avoid romanticizing any place
Yeah,
or generalizing about an entire culture based on just a limited number of voices.
right.
What these interviews offer is really like a starting point,
Okay,
a glimpse into a much more complex reality.
right. It sparked curiosity, challenge assumptions, and invite us to engage with the world in a more nuanced way. And
Exactly.
that's what I love about these deep dives.
Me too.
We're not just like presenting information,
Right.
we're encouraging critical thinking, a more thoughtful understanding of these topics.
Absolutely. It's about empowering our listeners to go beyond the surface,
Mm-hmm.
is to engage with these stories, question their own biases,
Yeah.
and ultimately expand their understanding of the world around them.
So as we wrap up this deep dive into the lives of Black American expats in the Philippines,
Yeah.
what's the one key takeaway you hope listeners will carry with them?
I think it's the power of personal stories.
Yeah,
They can illuminate so much about ourselves and the world.
right?
If we listen with an open mind, with a willingness to learn, we can challenge our assumptions,
Mm-hmm.
broaden our perspectives, and contribute to a more understanding and inclusive global community.
Beautifully said. And on that note, we'll leave you with this thought. If you could step outside your comfort zone, immerse yourself in a totally different culture, where would you go? And what do you think you'd discover, not just about the place, but about yourself?